What if the biggest confession in Sister Wives just exposed the truth behind the entire Brown family story? Because when Kody Brown claimed he was the victim of 3 wives walking away, fans exploded with questions that change everything about Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Mary Brown. So before we uncover the real story behind this shocking moment, make sure you hit subscribe right now, because the truth coming next is something every fan needs to hear, and you will not want to miss what happens next. The story that unfolded over 2 decades on the reality television series Sister Wives has always been presented as a complicated but determined attempt to build a large plural family. Yet, in recent seasons, the narrative surrounding Kody Brown shifted in a way that left viewers questioning everything they thought they understood about the family and the relationships within it. Because what once appeared to be a unified structure of faith, commitment, and shared responsibility slowly revealed deep fractures that had been forming for years. And the moment that truly ignited intense debate among fans arrived during the season 20 finale, when Kody stood before the cameras and described himself not as the cause of the family breakdown, but as the victim of 3 women who chose to walk away from their covenant. And those words immediately echoed across the audience, because for many viewers, the statement felt disconnected from the history they had watched unfold across 20 seasons, a history that included moments of affection, celebrations of anniversaries, shared parenting experiences, and public discussions about the values that held the Brown family together. And as fans revisited those earlier seasons, they began noticing the contrast between the hopeful tone that once defined the show and the tension that eventually replaced it. Because when the series first introduced the family, the message was simple. Plural marriage was presented as a lifestyle built on cooperation, faith, and mutual respect, with Kody at the center of 4 relationships, including Mary Brown, Janelle Brown, Christine Brown, and later Robyn Brown. And the family described their marriages not simply as romantic partnerships, but as part of a larger spiritual commitment, a belief that their unity carried meaning beyond everyday life. Yet, as the years progressed, the practical challenges of maintaining that structure became increasingly visible. Viewers watched the family move from Utah to Las Vegas and eventually to Arizona, and with every relocation, new stresses appeared, including financial decisions, housing arrangements, parenting disagreements, and the emotional difficulty of balancing multiple marriages within one household structure. And although the Browns often emphasized the importance of equality, the audience gradually began noticing patterns that suggested the relationships were not evolving in the same way for each wife. And that observation became more pronounced after Robyn joined the family, because while the show presented her arrival as an expansion of love and support, many viewers sensed that the emotional dynamic between Kody and Robyn carried a different intensity than his relationships with the original lives. And at first, these differences appeared subtle, small changes in how time was spent, how conversations unfolded, or how conflicts were addressed. Yet over the years, those subtle differences grew more visible until the audience could no longer ignore the shift. And the tension eventually reached a breaking point when Christine decided to leave the marriage and move to Utah, a decision that she described as the result of years of feeling emotionally disconnected from Kody and unable to maintain a partnership that no longer felt balanced. Her departure marked a turning point for the viewers because it was the first time the plural structure that had defined the show began to openly unravel. And when Christine spoke about the reasons behind her choice, she described moments that many fans remembered from the show, including disagreements about intimacy, emotional support, and parenting responsibilities. And as those conversations aired, audiences began reevaluating earlier seasons through a new perspective, asking whether the warning signs had been present long before the marriage ended. And not long after Christine left, another shift occurred when Janelle also separated from Kody, explaining that her priorities had changed and that her relationship with him had reached a point where continuing the marriage no longer felt sustainable. And once again, viewers saw a pattern emerge because Janelle spoke about independence, personal boundaries, and the need to focus on the well-being of her children, themes that echoed some of Christine's concerns. And as the audience absorbed this second separation, they realized that the transformation of the Brown family was accelerating. The structure that once appeared permanent was dissolving piece by piece. Yet the most surprising moment came when Mary, whose relationship with Kody had already been distant for years, finally acknowledged that their marriage was over. And for longtime viewers, that development carried emotional weight because Mary had been the first wife, the beginning of the entire family story, and seeing that final connection end symbolized the closing of a chapter that had lasted more than 2 decades. And throughout these changes, Kody's response remained a central focus of the show because he often described the separations as painful, confusing, and difficult to understand. Yet the way he explained those feelings sometimes created new questions for the audience, particularly when he suggested that the wives had chosen to abandon the covenant that once united them, because viewers remembered earlier episodes in which he openly questioned his own emotional connection to some of the marriages, and those comments created a contradiction that became impossible to ignore. If the relationships were built on sacred commitment, how could they also be described as partnerships that lacked genuine love? And this tension fueled endless discussions among fans who debated whether Kody words represented honesty, reflection, or an attempt to reinterpret the past in a way that protected his sense of identity. And as these debates unfolded, another element of the story began drawing attention: the role of the Brown children. Because the family included more than a dozen sons and daughters who had grown up in front of the cameras and whose perspectives offered a unique window into the reality of life within such an unusual household structure. And as those children reached adulthood, many of them began sharing their own reflections on the family dynamic, describing both the positive memories and the challenges they experienced while growing up. And their voices added depth to the conversation because they had lived the experiences that viewers only observed from a distance. Some maintained close relationships with their father, while others created distance, choosing instead to focus on their individual paths and relationships with their mothers. And these choices demonstrated that the impact of the family transformation extended far beyond the marriages themselves, affecting multiple generations and shaping the way each member understood the meaning of family loyalty and independence. And while all of this unfolded, the series itself continued documenting the conversations, apologies, and attempts at reconciliation that took place between Kody and his former wives. And these moments often carried a sense of anticipation because viewers hoped they might reveal a deeper understanding or perhaps even a resolution to the long-standing conflicts. Yet the outcomes rarely provided simple answers. Sometimes the discussions ended with partial acknowledgement of mistakes, while other times they reopened old wounds, leaving everyone involved searching for clarity. And this uncertainty became one of the defining features of the later seasons, because the audience could see that the people involved were still processing years of shared history, while simultaneously building new lives apart from the structure that once connected them. And the more viewers watched, the more they realized that the story of the Brown family was not simply about the success or failure of plural marriage, but about the complicated human process of growth, change, and reflection. Because relationships that begin with hope can evolve in unexpected ways as individuals discover new priorities, new boundaries, and new understandings of what they need from the people around them. And in the case of the Browns, those discoveries happened under the constant attention of cameras and audiences, which added another layer of pressure to every conversation and every decision. And perhaps that is why the statement Kody made in the finale resonated so strongly with viewers, because it forced everyone watching to confront the central question of the entire story: who truly holds responsibility when a family changes so dramatically? Is it the result of individual choices, cultural expectations, emotional miscommunication, or simply the natural evolution of relationships over time? And as fans continue debating these questions, the legacy of the series grows more complex, because the Brown family journey now stands as a detailed record of how a once unified household navigated faith, love, responsibility, and personal freedom while the world watched. And even though several marriages have ended, the conversations surrounding those years continue shaping how audiences interpret the past and imagine the future for each person involved. And with every interview, reflection, and update from the former wives and Kody himself, the story gains another layer, reminding viewers that family narratives rarely end with a single conclusion. Instead, they continue unfolding through the choices people make after the cameras stop rolling and the lives they build beyond the moments captured on screen. As the story continued unfolding after the initial separations, the emotional landscape of the family became even more complex because the focus of the conversation slowly moved away from the simple question of who left the marriage and instead toward the deeper question of how the relationships had reached that point after decades of shared history. On Sister Wives, viewers had watched the Brown family grow, expand, relocate, and face numerous challenges. Yet the unraveling of the marriages forced everyone, including the audience, to look back at earlier seasons with a different perspective because many of the moments that once seemed ordinary now appeared filled with clues about the strain building beneath the surface. And this shift in perspective created a powerful sense of suspense for longtime viewers who began revisiting old episodes, remembering the laughter, family gatherings, and promises that the family would remain united despite the challenges of plural marriage. And the more they reflected, the clearer it became that the story was not defined by a single event, but by years of small decisions, emotional distance, and changing expectations that slowly reshaped the connections between Kody Brown and the women who had built the family alongside him, including Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, Mary Brown, and Robin Brown. And as each chapter of the story unfolded, viewers began to see how differently every person involved interpreted the past, because relationships that last for decades often carry layers of memory that do not always align perfectly. And in the Brown family, those differences in perspective became increasingly visible as the wives spoke openly about their experiences. Some described moments when they felt their voices were not heard, while others spoke about the difficulty of maintaining balance in a family structure that required constant communication, patience, and compromise. And while these conversations unfolded, Kody himself continued offering his own interpretation of the events, describing feelings of confusion, disappointment, and the belief that the unity he once envisioned had slowly disappeared. And this is where the narrative gained another layer of complexity, because when someone feels that a shared vision has collapsed, it is natural to search for explanations that make sense of the loss. Yet the explanations offered by each member of the family often highlighted different aspects of the same story, creating a mosaic of viewpoints rather than a single unified account. And for the audience, this diversity of perspectives turned the series into something deeper than a reality program. It became an ongoing exploration of how individuals interpret the same experiences in very different ways, depending on their emotions, expectations, and personal journeys. Meanwhile, the lives of the former wives continued moving forward beyond the structure that had once defined them. Christine began building a new chapter, filled with independence, personal happiness, and eventually a new marriage that symbolized the possibility of starting over after years within a plural family. Janelle focused on strengthening her sense of autonomy while maintaining strong relationships with her children and pursuing her own interests. And Mary, who had spent years navigating uncertainty about the future of her relationship, gradually embraced a path that allowed her to focus on personal growth and business ventures outside the traditional family structure. And these developments created a fascinating contrast because while the marriages had ended, the individuals involved were discovering new identities that extended far beyond the roles they once held. With connection, identity, and balance is a journey shared by people everywhere, regardless of how their families are formed. And in that sense, the story of the Browns may still have chapters left to tell because the lives of the individuals involved continue moving forward, creating new experiences, new relationships, and new perspectives that will inevitably shape how the past is remembered and how the future unfolds for everyone who once stood together under the same roof, believing their covenant would last forever. At the end of the day, Kody Brown isn't the victim, and the truth is clear. These women reclaimed their lives and their voices from a marriage built on imbalance and manipulation. And if you want to keep getting the real behind-the-scenes truth about sister wives and see every shocking twist and revelation as it happens, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Because the story doesn't end here, and there's so much more coming that you need to see.